Jesus made it very clear when he meets up with his friends after coming back to life. I am not a ghost. Look at me, touch me, here I am, flesh over bones, a real body. Think of Ghostbusters. What happens when you touch a ghost? Let's have a look. I wonder if someone would be ready to help me. Here, I have Whitey here. Whitey is my little ghost. And I had asked if the Boy Scouts maybe would come and help me with a little demonstration. Would you come? That would be so kind. That would be so very kind of you. So what I believe is that ghosts, that you can really, if you try to touch them, your hand will just go through, right? That's what I learned from movies and all kinds of stuff. So I wonder, could you demonstrate that? If you try to touch, does your hand go through? Whoo! Indeed, it goes through. Someone else, does your hand go through? It goes through, right? Whitey is a ghost. Now, if you touch my arm, can you go through? No. Okay, what about you? Can you go through? No. Why not? Why can't they get through my arm? Solid, right? Flesh and bone. Thank you very much. Whitey says thank you too. Say goodbye to Whitey. Thank you. A little trick, Trick of the trade. Trick of the trade. So we saw the hands went right through the ghost. The body is an apparition, but not real. Other than with the ghost I brought, when Jesus' friend touch his body, they can feel the flesh, the bones, the skin, and yet, as we know from other post-resurrection encounters, somehow Jesus is different, hard to recognize, and his friends are just not sure. Is it really him? So Jesus gives them the ultimate proof of embodiment. Have you anything here to eat? Jesus asks. And they give him a piece of broiled fish. And Jesus eats it. In some of the early versions of this gospel text, Jesus also receives and eats a honeycomb. And so it is not surprising that in the early church, fish and honey oftentimes were served during the Eucharistic meal together with bread and wine. François Bovon, in his commentary on the Gospel of Luke, mentions that honey is regarded in antiquity as paradisiacal food. So it makes sense to have it all at the very ritual meal at which we celebrate Jesus' resurrection. But what about the fish? What role does fish play in the Gospels? Well, fish is mentioned a lot in the Gospels. If you think about it, it's not surprising because fish was a very important staple food in the region. The Sea of Galilee is a huge lake, and much of Jesus' ministries happens at her shores. Right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the first calls, the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, are set among fishers. The first disciples' lives are centered in fish. And I'm citing from Matthew. As Jesus walked in Galilee, he saw two brothers, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." In the Gospel of Luke version, the call is connected with abundant harvest. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. Jesus knows where to find the fish. Jesus and the fish are connected. Maybe Jesus even summons the fish. Certainly, the stories which later follow about the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000 describe that Jesus has the power to multiply fish, and bread until all those who are hungry are fed. These are important food stories teaching us to always share and be hospitable no matter the circumstances. In one of a series of parables in chapter 13, the writer equates the kingdom of heaven with a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. Gary Paul Nabhan wrote a poetic version of this parable in his book, Jesus for Farmers and Fishers. Again, I ask you, what would you say our circle of kinship should be like? Nabhan asks at the beginning, and he ends the parable with a vision of sustainability and care. He says, the fishers sit down among the harvest to begin to select the fish mature enough to keep, while tossing the immature ones back into the waters to grow some more, for they are simply not ready. And then there is this curious moment when Jesus suggests that the temple tax shall be paid from the coin found in the mouth of a freshly caught fish. Nabhan writes that the Sea of Galilee used to be full of tilapia. Tilapias are mouth brooders. The incubate her eggs in her mouth cavity until they hatch. When she releases the little fish, they oftentimes try to swim back into her mouth for protection. Fishers claim that the mother fish picks up pebbles or the occasional coin to prevent the re-entry of the little fish, because they need to grow up now. That Jesus knows this and predicts this to occur with the first fish caught shows us how intimately connected Jesus is with his local food system in general and with this specific fish in particular. In 3 of the 4 Gospels, the story of Jesus' ministry begins with the calling of fishermen. In 2 of them, it ends with meals of fish. Luke 24 tells us about the walk to Emmaus, and John 20 about another abundant catch. Both stories begin with encounters between disciples, friends of Jesus, and the resurrected Christ. And the disciples do not recognize Christ in his resurrected form. But when Jesus sits down with them and shares a meal with them, a meal of fish and bread, suddenly they know who they are eating with. In other words, through the sharing of fish and bread, Christ is revealed to the disciples. Fish is very important in the Pacific Northwest as well. We are all salmon people. You can read on a title page of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. This is accompanied by the following story. From a tribal legend, we learn that when the Creator was preparing to bring forth people onto the earth, he called a grand council of creation. From them, he asked for a gift for these new creatures, a gift to help the people survive, since they would be quite helpless and require much assistance from them all. The very first to come forward was salmon, who offered his body to feed the people. The second to come forward was water, who promised to be the home for the. In turn, everyone else gathered at the council gave the coming humans a gift, but it is significant that the first 2 were salmon and water. In accord with their sacrifice, these 2 receive a place of honor at traditional feasts throughout the Columbia Basin. These ceremonies always begin with a blessing on and the drink of water, followed by a prayer of thanksgiving on and the serving of vaikanush, the salmon. This ceremony reinforces the central role that salmon and water play in the health of Indian people and their culture. End of citation. This legend uses the language of sacrifice to describe salmon and water's gift to the people. Salmon offers his body to feed the people. Religious scholar Suzanne Crawford O'Brien sees a sacramental connection between some Native and Christian practices. She writes about Catholic missionary father Eugene Casimir Chirouz, who translated the Lord's Prayer into Kostalisch Lutheran in the 1850s. He used a general term for food, replacing bread, in the phrase we know as, "Give us today daily bread." Kostalisch elder Vi Hilbert later analyzed that translation. She was surprised that Chirouz had chosen that general term for food and not a word for salmon, which, as she explained, might carry for the Luschaside all the sacramental qualities of bread as food for the early Christians. And now that we have made ourselves aware of the importance of fish stories in the Gospels and the fact that fish was part of the Eucharistic meal in the early church, this connection even seems of more relevance, at least to me. If you think about it, Jesus was indigenous to his local culture around Lake Galilee. He and those around him were closely connected to the local food and family systems. Here's a thought. Jesus asks us in this passage to go out into the world and share his teachings with all nations. And somehow over time, we assumed that that meant that Jesus' teachings are fundamental and superior to all the teachings which were already present in the world. What if that is not what Jesus meant? Jesus, the one who bodily resurrected and proved that by eating fish, a local food for a local body. What if Jesus wanted us to build a network of local embodied teachings, connecting wisdom from all over the world under the umbrella of the caring love of God, the Creator? Would that make us look differently at the world around us, the creatures around us, the people, the fish, the waterways, the plants? Would we feel more connected, care more, listen more? What would need to happen to bring back tilapia into the Sea of Galilee? What would need to happen to give salmon free passage between the Salish Sea and the mountain creeks? Is Jesus Tilapia Man? Are we salmon people? The Snoqualmie Indian tribe, who have lived in the southern Salish Sea region since time immemorial, have launched the Ancestral Lands movement some years ago. They ask that we experience the lands in a way that is centered in mindfulness rather than conquest. Mindfulness rather than conquest. They ask that we pick up our own trash, and maybe also that others have left behind, I might add, and that we acknowledge the tribe in writing as well as in practice. If you think about it, faith is always practical, embodied. Resurrected Jesus was embodied. He ate fish. He cared for fish. How do we practice our faith in mindful and embodied ways, here and now, following Jesus' lead? Think about it. Tell me. Let it be so. Amen.